individually, I guess, think about it. Susan, did you come up with
No,
Well,
She wasn't here last Sunday.
she called me. And I almost didn't come today because I hadn't done it. And I tried, but nothing would come to my head.
Well, I said it was a lesson for me because as a teacher, I tried to always make sure that the assignment was one that was within the capacity and.
Well, you don't know what the heck it is. I even
Surely Emily wrote one.
I even thought I should come down and look at the whiteboard, which I didn't, but I did. In apology, I did look online and I read about parables, and I read about the 3 parts of a parable, and I tried and I tried and I tried to think, and nothing would come in my head.
Well, I understand, because when I started to do the assignment, if you can't do your own assignment, it's a pretty humiliating thing. So I had problems, but I came up with something that might conceivably work. It's a true story of someone, and it goes back to our expectations, and it's a.
You know you can flip that thing over, Joe. You don't have to turn it around.
Is that possible?
She wrote with the upside down.
Oh, I should have told you before you wrote it. Sorry.
Okay, what I came up with is, and by no means anything that's exciting.
Johnny Appleseed. Yay, Jo Ann.
This guy, John Chapman, later was known as Johnny Appleseed. He lived in 1714 in the Northwest Territory, where there was a really interesting thing from the government. If you planted 5 apple trees and 20 peach trees within 3 years, you could have 100 acres.
Oh.
Sounds pretty good, doesn't it? But there was a problem. There weren't enough apple trees to go around, or there weren't enough apple trees. And the apple then was sour and very small. In fact, somebody said that it would make a squirrel blanch if he tried to eat one of the apples. They were all just little knobby things. They were sort of juicy, but they were knobby. But guess what they were used for at that time?
Okay. Cider?
Cider.
They had something worthwhile.
They were used for cider. And to make cider, if you've ever seen how cider is made, you take a bunch of apples and you wash them, and then you put them in a press, which smushes them to nothingness. And the juice comes out, and you can doctor it up some, and you can make a fairly decent drink. Well, that was really important on the Northwest Territory, because the water that they had to drink was often polluted and quite often carried germs. So that people who would drink the water would get sick. So that was an excuse for drinking cider rather than drinking water out of the creek. So John Chapman was the most curious guy. He was tall and gangly, and there was some speculation that he might have had Marfan syndrome, which is what Lincoln is supposed to have had, where you have extremely long arms and legs and a weakness in the aorta that usually kills you. But he lived to be pretty old, so maybe he didn't have Marfan syndrome. Maybe he was just tall and gangly. He wore the same clothes all the time, and he made his shirts out of feed sacks that he would cut a hole in for his head and holes for his arms. So he was not well dressed, not particularly well coiffed. His hair was pretty scraggly down. And even more interesting, he went barefoot all the time.
A modern day John the Baptist.
It sounded exactly like John the Baptist to me. And he was born in a large family. He left home as a fairly young adult, and what he chose as his mission in life was interesting. He carried apple seeds that he got from the squeezings of the apples to make apple cider. And apple seeds were very lightweight, so they wouldn't be very heavy and slow you down. And he went tromping around looking for a place that he could set up a nursery. And whenever he found a place, he would plant a bunch of apple seeds. He did not believe in the common way that they had at that time of producing apple trees. What they would do is they would find an apple that had a stalk, and they would cut it like that and graft onto it a twig from another apple tree that was producing apples, and you would have, this would make apples that were just like the original tree over here. Well, that's good if you've got a really, really good apple tree, but it's very slow. But the reason that John Chapman didn't do that was that he objected to cutting the stem off, because he was a believer in this religious group right here that said you shouldn't cause pain to plants. So he had some interesting ideas. But anyway, he went through and he planted rows of seeds. Then he'd come back 3 years later and see if any had come up and take care of them. And he began to produce apples that could be planted. And some of those were much more improved. They say the Yellow Delicious apple was one that came out of his seeds, because seeds produce better than the clones do. So if we want to, if we want to have something that will last many years, we want as much variety as we can get. And he got some very good varieties out. So many of the apple trees that we now plant come from his seeds that he put down, because they had been produced randomly in the field by sexual recombination, pollen and flower. Now this guy that he was following, Emanuel Swedenborg, does anybody know about a church that's called the New Church, a denomination? I was confident there would be one in Asheville, but no luck. There's not one in North Carolina. But there are some in other bigger cities, like DC has one. And they follow the teachings of this guy, who was born in Sweden, but he got exiled to Europe because he was so controversial. He was a scientist, a philosopher, and a mystic. And finally, at age 56, he had a message from God. And he was appointed by the Lord to write a heavenly doctrine to save Christianity. And so he did. And his doctrine of the new church said that the Trinity, the way we conceive of it, is not correct. He said that Jesus was the body. He did his work through the Spirit. So he was the embodiment of the Spirit. And when he died, he became the Holy Ghost. The Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost were all united into one. He came from the Father. He had works which were of the Spirit. And so he was of all, yes.
So it's more of a like metamorphosis sort of aspect.
What is science? What part of
I don't know. But anyway, he lived from 1888 to 1772. He got exiled from Sweden because of the king did not like his theology. And so he lived in Europe. And he started this Swedenborgian church, which somehow John Chapman had heard about. And in it had, "Do not cause harm to any living creature, including plants." So that was part of John Chapman's motive for not using the plants themselves, but also carrying seeds is much lighter than hauling around a bunch of this kind of stock. So, okay, so I thought that the only moral that I could come up with to this story was that good comes out sometimes of the unlikeliest people that you would imagine. So that through his action and through his work, and it wasn't like the Walt Disney movie where everything is happy, 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 and he's scattering the seeds as he goes.
Well, my children always thought it were. My school children.
I know.
You taught me more just now than I ever learned about Johnny Appleseed in school.
Well-
My children, and I taught it all the time. It's great.
But it's an interesting story, and it's sort of, a moral to the story is that people are still seeking to find explanations for things that bother them. Like Swedenborg was bothered by the Trinity. He found that he could not accept the Trinity as being three separate things. And when we say the Apostles' Creed, what does it say? At the
Proceeds
end?
from the Father? Who proceeds from the Father?
Proceeds from the Father, yeah. And we tend to not worry about the separateness of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, right? That doesn't tend to bother us, but it bothered him enough so that he tried to incorporate it into one, yeah.
I think also another lesson to be learned out of this is that we might not always see the fruits of our labors, or it might not be immediate, but having that patience and grace for things to grow and the compassion to know that it takes time is also a huge factor in our lives.
It sure is. Waiting is hard.
I had prepared a parable that was very similar to this.
Oh, good.
There was a young man, age 22, who believed he was called into the Methodist ministry. He went to the conference and presented himself. He had only a high school education. And they accepted him. He never served a large church. He served in rural South Alabama and North Florida during the 1890s and early 1900s. Like Johnny Appleseed, he never served more than 3 years in a parish, and usually it was 1 to 2. But everywhere he went, he planted fruit trees, and he made a garden, and he fixed up the parsonage, and he fixed up the church, and enlisted the people in doing that. The South Alabama, North Florida conference in his obituary said, and I've quoted a little bit of it already, he never served a church, what was recorded as a good parish, but he left many churches that pastors wanted to go to. That man was my grandfather. He was kind of the unofficial agricultural agent, teaching all his people how to farm in a way that they could farm and compete when the McCormick Reaper came in and revolutionized farming. So, parallel, one quick statement about the Trinity. In Greek, it is the word that we translate persons isn't persons at all. It is persona. It is mask, the same word that is used in Greek drama for mask. Persona. 3 presentations of God, really, is the Greek. We did not adopt that because we were influenced by the historic, after the 300s, we did not adopt that understanding, but that is an early understanding of the Trinity. I like to sing when we do Holy, 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 God in 3 persona, because it expands the understanding of that unity and diversity embodied in the Trinity.
It sounds like your grandfather's life was a life well lived.
Yeah. 7 children,
Oh my.
married a teacher like my father did. He was, but my father didn't have a high school education. But anyway, enough about my family, but that's my parable.
Thank you, that's very interesting, and it shows that your grandfather believed in addressing more than just spiritual needs of a congregation, that he addressed other needs like...
Well, he saw all needs as based in faith and spirituality. He would only disagree with you in that what we like to call secular isn't. That God is Lord of all, and all of his children are important. And what we do in life, whether it's preaching or plumbing, is a ministry.
Thank you. One addendum that I would like to make about apples, getting back to the apple seed part. We are in danger now of eating our way toward extinction with several food crops, where there has been a lot of tearing up of farmland, plowing under of forest and so on. And one of the crops that is in danger still is the apple, because in Kazakhstan, where the wild apples grow, that area is now being developed. And there's a really good book about looking at the way we assume that what we have now in terms of stock will be useful for the future. It may not be. Things may happen, diseases may take over and ruin the crops, or we may just run out of viability with many of the foods that we're eating. So if you get a chance, look at that book, Eating Toward Extinction, and it'll make you think about what we are doing to our world.
Don't they have, seed banks in the, way down, you know, huge things in the middle of a mountain or something where they try to?
They do, and that would be very useful for the long run.
Mm-hmm.
For the short run, where if we do get into trouble with growing crops, there will be wailing and gnashing of teeth.
Well,
Well,
one positive thing that is happening though is there's movement in several areas to go back to some of the, what are called heirloom, plants, especially food plants. I know in South Carolina, rice is very important. And one of the companies down there was collecting all of the old rice plants and propagating, so producing more and more rice. And they sell these the product, the rice, to several high-end restaurants and people who prefer to have the heirlooms. You can buy heirloom seeds now. I use So True seeds in Asheville because they often have heirloom plants. But it may be too little too late because of the pollinators. We've done so much damage with pollinators that you don't have many. We have European bees, for instance. We don't have many native bees left. And people who have who produce honey will very often take their bees to a farmer to propagate their plants. And in Japan, they propagate by hand very often because they don't have the pollinators that they need. But anyway, I did my research was in restoration, so that was just one of the outlets I heard.
Would you, maybe you could expand on the problem that when we use one variety of whatever, and field after field after field is the same variety. What I understand is if you have a blight or a particular pest, you can wipe everything out.
Exactly.
Whereas if you have various varieties, they are not as vulnerable to that kind of problem that comes partially from climate change, but not just from climate change.
Well, the plant that I worked with is native bamboo, and because it does not self-propagate, it is becoming extinct because of developments mainly. There are other reasons, and that is the reason why, because it has been reduced to small populations, it can't propagate because it can't self-propagate in those small populations. And so since there's not these large populations with a lot of variety, then it's becoming extinct. And that's true of what you're saying. You know, it's that way with a lot of plants. Anytime you reduce the population to one single genetic composition, then it will be more susceptible to disease. All those GMO plants that are being produced right now are very often genetically improved, but at the same time, they are going to be more open to diseases and stuff. Now, one of the things they do with the GMO plants is to develop disease, what they're calling disease resistance. Well, that may be one disease, and it doesn't exclude other factors that can, reduce populations. But hey, I'm lecturing. I'm sorry. That's
Well,
Would you
that,
please send a list of recommended reading, at least to me? I'm fascinated by this and would like to learn more.
okay.
And don't you think that as Christians, we have an obligation to the environment and to
Absolutely.
diversity so that we can take care of God's earth?
yes, and wouldn't that work also with animals? Like, good example is thoroughbred dogs that are much more prone to disease than your porch dogs. The crowned heads of Europe, inbreeding, and real problems. If you're a mutt like I am, be thankful.
Heath, did you have something?
So, I think this is a great conversation, just especially thinking in the context, not that we should focus on that one day, but Saturday coming up will be Earth Day. So thinking about sort of the role of climate justice and our role within improving and protecting our planet. But I was thinking on sort of some of the parables that I've been able to hear, and particularly the one of Wiley's grandfather, and then thinking about the seed aspect. I struggled with this assignment. I think it sounds like most people did. So I gave it some guidelines and decided to turn to ChatGPT to see if ChatGPT was capable of writing a parable. So ChatGPT using artificial intelligence to do something like that. And I thought it was interesting that the parable that it came up with, based on whatever it had access to across the interwebs, was seeds of potential, which goes a little something like this. Once upon a time, in a far-off land, there was a beautiful garden. It was filled with vibrant flowers, lush greenery, and towering trees. The garden was tended by a wise old gardener who took great pride in his work. He spent countless hours nurturing the plants, pruning the leaves, and watering the soil. One day, a group of travelers stumbled upon the garden. They were amazed by its beauty and asked the gardener, how had he created such a magnificent place? The gardener smiled and said, it was not me who created this garden, but the seeds I planted. The travelers were confused, but how could a simple seed create something as beautiful as this garden, they asked. The gardener explained, every seed has the potential to become something great. It holds within it the power to grow and thrive, but it needs the right conditions to do so. Just like the seed needs fertile soil, water, and sunlight to grow into a magnificent plant, we too need the right conditions to reach our full potential. The travelers pondered the gardener's words and realized they too had seeds within them, seeds of kindness, love, courage, and wisdom. They understood that if they nurtured these seeds and created the right conditions, they too would grow into something beautiful. And they set out on their journey with newfound understanding. They tended their seeds with care, and over time they grew into magnificent plants, just like the ones in the gardener's beautiful garden.
Isn't that lovely?
You must send that to us some way, a link. Honestly, it'd be great to
What
share with
what
them.
question did you pose when you
I said, help me write a parable like those in the Bible.
That was it.
And that
That's
was
the-
it. That was the
that
first
is
try.
most, I think, interesting and encouraging example of artificial intelligence that I have heard in a long time.
Oh, it
Maybe
is.
than
It
I've
makes
ever
me
heard.
less scared of artificial
Yes.
intelligence.
It
That
makes
was
me more
beautiful.
scared. Developing human feelings where iRobot is at the beginning of that movie right now.
And if you don't like it, you can regenerate it and tell it to do it again.
That would be interesting if you said, could you give me another example or something like that and see what it comes up with.
You're right.
And that's chat, GPT. what's up?
Chat, GDP, or what is it called?
GPT.
Chat GPT.
Mhm.
That's fascinating
Okay.
that
Yeah,
artificial intelligence can do that, isn't it?
that's amazing.
It can recognize the need of our environment and our world maybe better than some
Yes.
humans can.
And that same thing applies to people. People who are not tended and carefully nurtured
Mhm.
don't reach their full potential. And they ultimately cost the whole group a price. If we just looked at it from a purely selfish point of view, it would seem to me that we would be doing better. But we seem to be in some kind of a fog that we do things the way we've always done them.
There's a very contemporary example of what you say. You all recall the recent Nashville shooting at the private church-related school where innocent children were murdered. What is not being reported is, and I have good sources for this. It has been published, is that the man who was transgender, he had grown up as a girl, attended that school at the same time that that a boy attended that school and was accosted and basically assaulted by one of the school employees. And the church, which owns the school, refused to do anything about it and ran the boy's father and family out of town. She was a student in that school. She didn't want to go to that school. But she was made to go to that school. It's a very conservative branch of the Presbyterian Church who do not believe in inclusion of gay people, do not include transgender people, is really pushing the strong father myth in Christianity and so forth. Now, nothing can make his action right. That's not what I'm saying. But it's what you were saying, that this transgender person was deeply scarred by that school in childhood and grew up to assault the school.
And my physical therapist said, oh no, you're missing the point. That was murder, and that's what he wanted to focus on, rather than what the school had done to her earlier.
Well, it's a well-known fact that if you don't have enough food of the proper type by the time you're 4 years old, your IQ will be stunted if you don't have enough other things in your development. Your social awareness and your conscience will be stunted. So we judge quickly when we ought to look for some background information.
Amen.
And we should try to learn from the information that we know. But we tend to keep thinking that just because it went bad, it was not explainable. It was something that needs to be punished and nipped in the bud, is what the theory goes, but it doesn't work. It doesn't prevent future problems. If we want to prevent it, we should try to apply our best knowledge.
That's why I'm so thankful for this congregation. In a time when a perversion of Christianity is so common.
Can I say something? It's not direct, but it's the same thing. We get all these bad stories and we get kind of down. And 3-4 weeks ago,
John, we can't hear you.
yeah, it's about 3-4 weeks ago, I was down, I don't know, I was moving some plants around or doing something, and I hear this all over the place. The heck, it's a hornet nest around here someplace. And I happened to be under this Yoshino cherry, and I look up, and I was telling Carla about it, remember? And I look up, that tree was swarming with these little bees all over the place. And we sometimes worry about our bees. Well, it's nice to know the world isn't giving up on itself, even if we try to make it inadvertently difficult for it. And if we are part of the whole creation, we do our little part one at a time, we'll be okay. Well, we're pretty much set that we're gonna be okay. The future generations we're
What
worried
happened to
about.
your swarm of bees?
Huh?
What happened to the swarm of bees?
There wasn't a swarm. It was just, the tree was covered. And this is
Well, I know, but that was
a 20, 30 foot
from a
tree we
swarm.
have now there, covered with blossoms, and they were all over. They were just flower to flower.
But that would be a swarm that had dispersed in a tree. It would be a
Oh,
group
is that
of
how it
bees.
works? I don't know. All I know is that thing was covered with, and I heard this,
Do you think they were honeybees?
oh, they were. I know they were. They were just little guys.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the same kind I see in my peach tree. In my peach trees.
There was an interesting article in the Post this week, and I was kind of shocked by it. I really didn't know what to think about the article. But it was saying that bees in our backyard, that we believe we're promoting bees and we're caring for them and we're producing our own honey, and that's a good thing. However, and that was the point of this article, it's disrupting the natural ecosystem of insects and pollinators that would be in that area naturally without the introduced bees. I just thought that was an interesting thing. Hadn't thought about beekeeping as being detrimental to
And
the
those weren't necessarily native bees. They could have been European bees, which are more prevalent than native bees, but regardless, it's
There
good
are
to see.
3 or 4 different kind of bees that are in my yard. You
Yeah.
can tell the difference.
I've seen.
At different times, you know, I'm not always watching for them. Sometimes
But
they
it's
say, "Hey,
so
John,
odd that
here."
sometimes we think we're doing the right thing,
Yeah.
and then there's another side to it.
See, you did
Always.
write a parable.
Oh, is that a parable? The parable of the bees. Actually, I did kind of think up one, but I won't share it now. It's time to go.
It's not time to go.
No.
Well, you know what,
Later.
I've told, if it's not time to go yet, I'll try to, I was gonna embellish on a parable I've told, a few times. But, and make it a little fictional and some details and stuff. But, there was this, union plant or production facility around Chicago, and they just come through a big contract negotiation. And one of the things they had gotten was increased vacations, paid vacation. And it got around in the lunchroom that, hey, Martinez, he's getting an extra week's vacation he's not supposed to get. And so a couple of people run over to Frank and Stewart and they say to him, hey, there's been a mistake in the vacations. And Frank looks at him and says, wait a minute, we just went through a contract dispute. We were on strike for 25 days to get this thing, and see, I'm trying to say this instead of writing it down. But and Martinez, they said, anyway, he says, we just went through who took away your vacations? What do you mean, who's not getting all their vacations? And they says, no. Martinez got an extra week's vacation. Frank pauses for a second. He says, isn't that interesting? He said, remember when we were on strike and Blanket Chip plant manager wanted to get in and we're out on the sidewalk and he stood right in front of the car. And he wouldn't move. Took 20 minutes for the police to get there and make him move so he could get in. And he says, that's kind of fitting, isn't it? And remember too, when we were in that conversation, they were going to give only the older people some extra vacation. Remember how he tried to divide us and get Washington and Jones and Martinez to, that they would get it so that we would vote to come back in, but we all stayed together because it wasn't just about one of us. We were all going to get something out of this. And he says, well, no, Martinez got an extra week's vacation that he wasn't entitled to. Frank looks at him and says, well, I suppose we could report this, but I remember how Blanchett was really ticked off at Martinez. I wonder what's really going on here. You think maybe they did it on purpose to divide us again? And the point is, in my mind, is a lot of things in life, he says, as long as we got all ours, I think we're pretty good. Like I said, it is what Frank was saying. And he says, for good things to happen, we have to sometimes think about not what we've got or didn't get, but what we're all going to get. And I've told this story just before. I didn't put all this detailed stuff in it, but the point, it's like the parable of the workers in the vineyard is really what this kind of thing is about. If you focus on what you didn't get, it makes it hard to rejoice in what a good thing that happens to the whole community here. And it goes to Wiley's thing about this is a good congregation because we kind of look out for each other, think about each other. It's not what's in it for me. Anyway, there's a prayer.
Thank all of you for a good Sunday school class. Thank you.
I mean, it would take the story, all sorts of funny stories about everybody did it. But it would take a long time
A lot of that was
to get weather on the wrong. So it's not like you're just walking on the road. That's wild. I mean, if I did, I'd look up as well. Did you get all that out there?
I really deserve to.